All right, guys, welcome back or welcome to the Defining Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Coach Andrew Simmons, and my guest today is someone I'm really excited to have on, Maddie Alm from Fueling Forward. Maddie is a guest that I've been able to enjoy many times. This is her first time on the podcast, but she's also joined us as part of our high altitude camp for our high school group. And one of the big topics we're going to talk about today is our relationship with food. But before I start rambling down that rabbit hole, Maddie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I will admit to everybody, we got into a really good conversation right before I realized that I didn't click record. So, you know, we're we're coming back at this for the second time here. Maddie was kind enough to kind of really bring us into the world of where she started. So I'm gonna let her pick it back up there. If you can give us a little bit of background, Maddie, about where you found your love for nutrition and a little bit about your work up in Boulder.
Yeah, for sure. So I walked on to the University of Colorado track and cross country team. And I was definitely one of the slowest when I walked on. I was, not really fast by any means. I wasn't a standout high school athlete. So I had a lot of room for improvement. And I didn't really start seeing that improvement until I actually started working with the dietitian at the University of Colorado. And I started really focusing on my fueling and making some just small changes, and sure enough, I started to get stronger, get faster. My time started dropping. And I eventually ended up becoming an All American. And so that experience for me was really eye opening because I was maybe 20 years old when I met with this dietitian. And before that, no one had ever talked to me about nutrition or about fueling. So I was like, why don't more athletes know about this? This should be something we're all taught, you know, day one when we become athletes, that this is important. So that's what really inspired me to go on and pursue a career in nutrition. And then because of that success that I found towards the end of college, I actually had the opportunity to continue to run post collegiately. So now I kind of do both. I run with Joe Bosshard's group, Team Boss in Boulder. I've got some really awesome, amazing, world class teammates. And then I also have my own sports nutrition consulting business, Fueling Forward, where I work with athletes on nutrition. So I love getting to combine my two passions into one, and I love working with other runners because I've been where they are. I understand, like, all the unique challenges that we have as runners to fueling, whether it's your schedule or timing of things or things that upset your stomach. I've been there and I get it. So I really enjoy, helping athletes solve that puzzle and figure out what works best for them in terms of fueling.
Yeah, absolutely. Maddie's presentation, we had a number of speakers, and this is, not trashing on anybody else here, but Maddie's presentation that she gave was phenomenal, and was one of the most requested materials after camp. So if you guys are out there and looking, I'm gonna plug Maddie hard on this one because she does a great job at what she does, and any of my younger athletes out there, if you're looking to get an edge, I think nutrition is one of those places. I'm personally lucky enough to be testing out a continuous glucose monitor as part of a Super Sapiens US FDA trial, and it's brought me into this world of kind of looking a little bit closer at what I eat, and I think that that microscope at times it's a good thing. It's changed my perspective at least a little bit on what I'm eating and, how my energy and what my energy feels like when I go out for a run later that day. So I can do the A to B. But sometimes that microscope gets, a little too close, and maybe we start to kind of struggle with that. And so I wanted to talk briefly, and I know we're early into this. We're recording on October 27th. On October 25th, um, Oregon Live kind of released an article, and it definitely kind of brought one of the highest level programs in the U.S. Under pretty big scrutiny. And one of the big pieces there were the DEXA scans, and they were using this as a way to, choose, who does what. And so I kind of wanted to understand at least a little bit from you to kind of start this conversation off. Is we can assess our training a lot of ways. Is body composition and things like that? Is that the best way for us to assess the potential for success?
Yeah, so I guess I would probably start that by just saying, as a dietitian in my line of work, I have never used somebody's body fat percentage to give them any type of meal plan, or I've never seen a coach use that data to create a training plan for somebody. Body fat percentage can vary so much from person to person, and really a big part of our ability to change that is genetic. And so, if you're telling a huge group of athletes to shoot for the same range, yeah, you're going to have some athletes in there who can do that, but majority of them, it's going to be really challenging. And so you're basically encouraging these athletes to enter a state of being underfueled, and then on top of that, if you're prescribing extra training to help change their body fat percentage, now they're overtraining. And so that combination actually makes it even harder for us to change our body composition because our metabolism changes, our ability to build muscle changes. It really impacts a lot of different things. And that athlete is not only not going to change their body fat percentage, but they're going to experience all the other side effects of underfueling and overtraining. They're going to have sleep issues, stomach issues, difficulty concentrating, changes in mood. They're going to struggle to see changes due to their training because of this low energy availability state. And for the athlete, that's really frustrating. They feel like they're doing everything they can be and they're not seeing the results, or their body fat might even go up. And if your coach is deciding whether you travel or race or whatever based on this percentage, you can see how this would put an athlete or cause them to spiral pretty quickly because it is such a high intense atmosphere, and it's either perform and win championships or essentially get out, we don't really care. And that's a really hard environment to be in for a long time. And so I definitely admire the athletes who have spoken up. I know that's really hard to do, but it's clearly a problem that's affecting a lot of people. And hopefully there can be some changes that are made because, like I just said, that number is something that is more or less meaningless in the context of performance.
Yeah, you bring up so many great points. I can attribute a lot of even my own personal training to injuries and things like that. It's not just a carbs, fat, and protein part of this equation, right? We also have intake reflects in sleep. It reflects in how much we recover. And so I wanted to bring you on today to really kind of dive into our relationship with food. Um, we've seen things, fat is good, fat is bad. The trends are also in the same way of carbohydrates. As someone that's wearing a glucose monitor right now, like I'm digging that the carbs are on the list. But when that's the first thing, is that when people see it, maybe social media is the place they see, oh, got to cut all the carbs, and they see that person, and they have the physique that, quote unquote desirable physique that person may be after. um, where does that relationship with food start to break down?
Yeah, I mean, I think social media has definitely had a huge impact on younger athletes and body image and their relationship with food. I see this all the time. They get their nutrition advice from, somebody on TikTok or whatever it may be. And the tricky thing with a lot of these trends is they're called trends for a reason. They don't last because they're not sustainable. For example, like the low carb approach, yeah, you'll probably see some people lose weight or change their body composition. But there's two things I would say to that. One is, are they a high level endurance athlete? Probably not. And if they are, you're going to see their performance go downhill at one point or another. And the second thing is, like, at what cost are we cutting out those carbs? They are not typically not happy. They're not able to go enjoy meals with friends. Food is definitely a high stress topic for them. It's something that they're hyper focused on. It's taking up a lot of their energy just to try to eliminate this food group that we as humans require. Our brains use carbs, our bodies use carbs more efficiently than anything else. And so putting yourself into that state of deprivation is challenging both physically and emotionally. And like I said, that's not sustainable. That's not a fun approach. No one wants to be consumed by thoughts of food. But on social media, all you see is the person it worked for. And you see this body that you're like, oh, if I had that body, I would run so much faster. And so you do it trying to look like this person, which, like I said earlier, genetically maybe not be possible for a lot of people. And then at what cost are we trying to look like this person? And usually, well, I would say like 99% of the time, performance suffers pretty much immediately from those extreme changes.
Yeah, I think, that's where we could really have a conversation there about when does it become disordered? Eating, if it's saying that, hey, I'm only going to eat in these food groups, or I'm going to avoid carbohydrates or all fats. Um, I've always looked at diet, for better for worse, as a coach. It's not one, as a coach, it's not my place to define that. I'm here to train them, from a physiological and cardiovascular standpoint. When it comes to nutrition, that's why I get to know people like yourself, who are experts in the field, who've worked with, Olympic level athletes, and have also gotten the results therein. Um, and so with that, I think kind of the first question that I'm going to ask here to you is that, and this may seem obvious, but is there really such a thing as bad foods?
Yeah, that's a good question. Bad foods would be foods that have spoiled, have mold on them, or have fallen on the floor and are now covered in dirt. Yeah, those are the only types of bad foods that I would say you don't want to eat. Otherwise, labeling foods as good or bad, or even sometimes healthy versus unhealthy, it demonizes certain food groups. And especially, I see this a lot with athletes whose parents have struggled with nutrition at some point. If they're labeling foods as good or bad when the kid is younger, the kid starts to associate, oh, if I eat this food, this bad food, does this make me bad? And then people start to associate their self worth and their characteristics with the food that they're eating. And if they eat this bad food, then it makes them a bad person and they feel guilty when they eat it. So I think as a society, it's really hard to make those changes, but being really cautious about how you're talking about food, whether you're a coach, a parent, a teammate, a significant other, the way that you talk about food really impacts people, especially younger people. And if we can start to change that narrative to there are foods that we want to focus more on and foods that maybe we incorporate in smaller amounts, but we're never calling foods good or bad, that can kind of help start to change people's mindsets. And even for yourself, if that's something you struggle with,
Mhm.
separating like the idea of a food being good or bad from you being good or bad is really an important distinction to make.
Yeah, you touched on something that brought up a memory, and not a great one for me. I used to work at a health food store back in Michigan, and in the break room, I was sitting, and again, I was younger. I wasn't as aware of how my communication may have come across to someone else, and even that they may have, some disordered eating or had a past history with it. Um, and this is someone that I at the time considered a pretty close friend, and they had lunch. I literally just said, "Wow, you ate a lot for lunch." And she was just like, "Oh," it clearly became very internalized, and to a point of like pain and discomfort, um, and did not know that they'd had a background, with an eating disorder, and like a lot of this kind of goes back to dysmorphia, and like we can how we see our bodies, that if we don't have the ripped six pack, and the cuts in the veins, then we're not the picture of health and we're unhealthy, or that because we ate a lot, someone else is going to see us as quote unquote fat. this is where that relationship with food starts to get really tricky because it moves into this world of how we view ourselves and saying that our self-worth is now tied to how we look in the mirror. Um, from your standpoint, granted, you're doing more of helping people create better both eating habits and creating meal plans in a sense. How do you, you know, I guess massage those conversations? I'm sure you've worked with athletes that have had either a past history with it, and how do you talk with somebody, or how can we adjust our language as both coaches, athletes, and people to maybe not trigger people that are in our world? Because I'm sure that we've all been around athletes that have had it, and we might have said some things that we didn't know. So can you share at least a couple things, or at least some stories about athletes you've worked with, of course, in confidentially,
Mhm.
not breaking any of that. No names, please.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would confidently say 2/3 of the people that I work with, I've worked with over 200 athletes. I would say 2/3 of them have either a history of disordered eating or eating disorders or some type of unhealthy relationship with food. And so, food is an emotional thing. There's a big psychological component to food. Part of it is what we have, as a society, have created for ourselves. But food can initiate emotions, and that's okay. I hear a lot of people talk about emotional eating as being bad, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Finding comfort in food is human. We all have those foods that remind us of our families or simpler times or holidays, and it's okay to find joy and comfort in your food. Usually, when I see people negatively referring to emotional eating, it has to do with their emotions around food as a whole. And that kind of idea, like you just said, where they don't deserve to eat something maybe because they didn't work out enough today, or if they eat the cookie, they have failed at being disciplined. And so now they're a bad athlete or a bad person. And so, it's definitely a conversation I have with a lot of my athletes. How can we separate our self worth from the food we're eating? So, usually, the first thing we talk about is the fact that everybody has to eat food. Whether you exercise or not, our bodies cannot function without food. So, you don't have to earn your food. Being alive earns you your food, right? You need to eat. So, we kind of break down, okay, why do you feel like you don't deserve this food or to eat at this time, or on off days, for example. And then we kind of break down the myths around that. So for example, if I eat on an off day, I'm going to gain weight, or if I eat too much on an off day, I'm going to gain weight. And usually, your weight is not going to change that much in 24 hours. We all have weight that fluctuates 5 to 10 pounds throughout the day just from our bodies, and that's normal. And it's okay to see those changes, and it's healthy to see those changes. And even if you have like 2 weeks, a month off, whatever, yeah, your weight's going to change a little bit, but it's not going to be as extreme as you think. So I think kind of breaking down that fear and helping athletes understand it's not that extreme, first of all. Second of all, if you have an off day, you're probably trying to recover in some capacity. And if you don't fuel on your off day, you don't have those building blocks from your food to recover. So you're really not going to gain as much from that off day as you would have if you had just eaten your meals and snacks like you normally do. And then, usually you have a workout the next day, so you feel depleted, you feel tired, you're like, "Ah, it's because I ate too much on my off day." And usually it's because you didn't eat enough on your off day. So, kind of helping them break down those myths around fueling and weight gain, I think is something we do a lot. The other thing with body image is I always have my athletes who struggle with that write down 3 things that they love about themselves that has nothing to do with how they look. So maybe it's they're a really good friend, or they work really hard in school, or they're good at talking to people, or they're the person their friends come to when they have a problem. I think it's really important to see what else you have to offer besides your body, because it is just the vessel with which we live our lives, right? And no one's going to remember you for how you look. They're going to remember you for how you made them feel and how you contributed to their lives. And so it's really important, again, to separate your self worth from your body because that doesn't determine what kind of a person you are. What you're doing on a daily basis with your actions and your words really is what determines what kind of person you are. So I think it helps athletes to kind of break apart their self worth from their body image. And then lastly, especially with social media, if you're following people who are causing you to feel anxious or question your body or feel like you need to do something different, unfollow them. You don't need to see that on a daily basis, especially if it's affecting your ability to fuel and take care of your body. So, really just allowing yourself to disconnect, get rid of the triggering things on your feed, focus on positive things always really helps athletes feel less triggered and then over time focus less on body image.
You touched on something, I think in all three of those that um, is actually a really kind of deep and interesting thought. Is that so much of what we struggle with and what we view in our self worth as well as food is subconscious. Is something that our background thoughts that we may think that we don't control. And we could probably do a whole episode in discussion about how um, we move things from the subconscious to conscious thought. And very often we have to interrupt. When we have a bad thought, we have to interrupt that and say, oof, I caught myself thinking that can't eat ice cream because it's bad for me, even though I really want ice cream, or saying I have to do X to equal Y, inputs have to equal outputs. Those are subconscious thoughts. Those are things that live in a place that we thought we can't access. But once we recognize that, it's about having someone like yourself really in the picture as to give tools to. And so I think that's your job is not just writing nutrition plans and giving that to people. It's also saying I had some really tough thoughts about this and this and this, and then your job is to also help give them tools, which is why I'm really excited to have you on here today because I wanted to ask some questions that I think a lot of people um, may think is obvious, but the reality is it's not. How do we know if we're underfueled, right? And that's a really simple question, and a lot of people would say that I feel tired, but is it just as simple as that, or is it more chronic even? That there's chronic underfueling, or is it just spot you didn't eat enough yesterday, so you're gonna be tired tomorrow?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's definitely a chronic component to it. The longer you go with underfueling, the more severe and lingering your symptoms are. If you have one bad day of fueling, you might feel a little more tired the next day, or you might not be affected if you're consistently feeling well and your energy stores are topped off. So it really just depends on the severity of the underfueling, how long it's been going on. And then on top of that, why you are underfueling in the first place. If it's unintentional, you just didn't realize, usually the underfueling is not as severe. It's usually just a matter of, oh, I didn't realize I needed to have a snack here, or oh, I didn't realize I had needed to have carbs with my salad or whatever. It's usually just comes from kind of a misunderstanding of what you should be eating. And that's a lot easier to correct because it's usually just let's add a few things here, let's add a snack, boom, we're good to go. Usually those athletes feel a difference within 48 hours. If you are feeling in underfueling intentionally, that's where it usually becomes a little bit more intense. And it could be, an eating disorder, of course, will contribute to that, but that disordered eating pattern of thought where you're cutting out food groups, you're saying you have a food allergy when you just don't want to eat it. Some of those are big red flags that I look for in athletes. And then there's obviously some pretty severe symptoms that you can experience. Stomach issues is a big one, which often tends to worsen underfueling because the athletes are afraid to eat because they don't want to have stomach issues. So that makes everything worse. Poor sleep quality, like I said earlier, is a really big one that I see, and also irritability or like different changes in mood that aren't typical for you. That's one of the first things I see kind of manifest in athletes with underfueling issues. And then we can have it become as severe as, for female athletes losing their menstrual cycle, or we see stress fractures or bone related injuries, usually as a result of worsening bone density. We see hormones impacted, deficiencies, anemia, all those things can happen as a result of long-term underfueling. And all of those things are going to impact your performance negatively. So it really just depends on the severity. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that you'll notice, and you might be trying to convince yourself that it's not related to your fueling. You're just tired because you had a big workout. I run about 70 miles a week and I have doubles some days. And I have never had a day where I feel like I can't function or get up the stairs or get off the couch. I have good energy levels all the time. And, maybe the day after like the hardest workout ever, I'm a little sore and tired. But for the most part, my easy runs, I don't feel dead. And athletes don't usually understand that that's a fueling component. They just think
Mm.
it's normal.
Absolutely. No, I think you hit on some really great points. I know we're really close on time. Unfortunately for us today, we're working against the clock here. I did want to touch on two last questions. They both kind of relate to the off season. Now you're entering kind of the off season, at least right now. Maybe looking at indoor. I don't know. Um, so how do you manage the off season from a fueling standpoint, whether you're working with an athlete or even you yourself is a relevant example? Is it just calories across the board get cut? Do you change what you're eating? Just curious to understand that from your perspective as both a professional athlete and as a dietitian.
Yeah, I think an important component of off season is giving yourself a break, and that includes hyper focusing on what you're eating. The tricky thing as a dietitian is like, yes, there are times, especially with my elite pro athletes, where we're gonna make some changes with our diet as we approach peak competition season. I wouldn't do that with my high school athletes or my younger athletes, but that is something that is part of being an elite athlete. Sometimes we make some of those changes. So, off season is a really important time to just kind of like let go of all the stress and rigidity that comes with running and training constantly. You finally have this time where, you could go to happy hour with your friends and you don't have a long run in the morning, or, you can do these things. You can have a huge breakfast and not worry about upsetting your stomach for a run. So it's just this time that you can kind of live like more of a normal person. Um, and I think it's really important that athletes allow themselves to eat foods that maybe to them feel more indulgent or that they might feel guilty for eating. It's okay to eat those foods in the off season. Well, it's okay to eat those foods anyways, but I think athletes tend to restrict them in the off season because they're afraid of gaining weight. But I think that mental break is a really important part of the off season. And a big part of that is letting yourself just eat. And the second thing with the off season is, you're trying to recover from this big season. And again, if you're restricting to try to avoid weight gain, or you're going to just switch to eating salads, it's not going to be very fun. You're not really going to feel like you're in the off season. And B, you're probably not going to recover very well from that season. So when you do start back up with training, you're probably under fueled, you're feeling a little bit depleted, and it's going to feel really hard. So you're going to be like, man, I'm out of shape. I let myself go over break. And that's not really what happened. You almost did the opposite, right? So, fueling during the off season will help you not only get the most out of that recovery period, but will also allow you to take that mental and physical break. So when you do have to get back into it, it's not this like, you're still exhausted from the season and trying to be so focused and whatever. And it's a lot easier to make that transition, especially if you continue to eat meals and snacks like you were. It's not a huge change when you get back into things.
No, absolutely. I think in kind of shifting, and this will kind of be where I wrap things up. Is when is there such a time as the best time for someone to work on body composition? I know we spent a good majority of this podcast kind of being wary and maybe touching on the bad side of that, but there is absolutely a reason to have to work on body composition, um, especially if someone is early into their history as an endurance athlete. They need to lose some weight. That is excess weight, maybe an older adult or things like that. Is that best during a time when we do have a lot of intensity. I think a lot of people associate high intensity and then cutting calories, that's it's the fastest route to get from A to B. Um, I would like to think that that's a fallacy, that there is no faster route. But as a as a registered dietitian, from your standpoint, is there a best time to work on these things, and is it just something that they have to be patient with?
Yeah, so anytime we see fast body composition changes, that's a red flag. We never want body composition to change quickly. That's usually the result, again, of underfueling or overtraining. Honestly, if we take a look at, we'll say, athlete A who eats the same throughout the season, their body composition will change still because their training is going to change, right? We have the base training phase where you're really building the endurance capacity, volume focus, that kind of thing. So we'll see more of like the slow twitch muscle fibers develop. Usually the intensity is pretty high. So maybe we see a little bit of changes with body fat percentage. And then as we shift into the intensity, so like speed work or more event specific training, we see more muscle development in response to that training. So we see an increase in muscle mass. So no matter what you do with your fueling, if it stays the same all season, your body composition is not going to stay the same just because your training and that stimulus is changing so much. So instead of having athletes focus on like times to restrict or times to try to lose weight, really my goal for them is to just stay fueled, and we'll see those body composition changes happen naturally. Again, depending on the type of athlete I'm working with, if it's appropriate for them, their history, their genetics, taking a lot of things into consideration. Maybe we'll have like a peak where we kind of focus for maybe 3 to 6 weeks, but it's really not healthy for an athlete to be at their leanest for very long. It's that's when we start to see the breakdown happen. So for I'm talking like my pro Olympian athletes, we have like 3 to 6 weeks where they're their leanest, and then we pretty quickly need to go back up in body composition, or else we start to see injuries and illness and a decrease in performance. So it's pretty sensitive, and I don't really do that with a lot of my lower level athletes because it's not going to make or break your performance. The biggest thing that will is feeling well, because we'll see those changes happen no matter what. So it just kind of depends on the person, but usually it's not like a hyper focused thing of our sessions. And most athletes find that when they fuel consistently and they increase carbs and protein, their body composition improves a lot. Like just from fueling better, their body composition changes. And then, like with weight, a pound of muscle and a pound of fat look the same on the scale. So I've had athletes who gain weight because they're increasing muscle mass and they feel frustrated, but I'm like, no, this is a good thing. This means you're fueling well enough to support your training. So we're able to see those changes actually happen. So I think it's important for athletes to understand the distinction between like weight and body composition and how those two things are going to affect performance, because weight, not so much, body composition more so. But that's really just going to come from fueling well and training consistently, which can only happen if you're healthy.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. As metrics go, the scale has proven to be one of the worst metrics to use as an assessment tool, whether it's at the professional level, the collegiate level, or even just in your own journey. What really does matter, if I can wrap this correctly, is if we eat well. And this means, not always restricted, but if you're eating well and you're eating the right things, your body composition will kind of be equal to what you were doing, right? Our bodies will adapt to the stimulus that we give them. But the underlying factor here is that we still have to fuel. We have to fuel our bodies to be able to perform. We will underperform if we underfuel. It's a very simple thing. Um, I'm I know that we could keep going. I have questions. I'll have to have you back on. I want to talk all about,
Absolutely.
what does it look like to eat like a pro? Let's
Mhm.
talk about blood testing and some other fun things there.
Yeah.
So, Maddie, I will have to let you go since I know we're tight on time for both of us here today. I appreciate you squeezing me in. But before we go, I want to make sure that after this episode, people can find you if they're looking for an amazing, superhuman dietitian, one just like yourself. Where can you be found?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I'm at fueling_forward. That's my business Instagram. And then you can also find my website, fuelingforward.com, if you're interested in reaching out about scheduling a session.
Awesome. Well, I highly encourage you guys to hop over there, follow along with what she does. You're always posting good stuff. That's always getting my mind thinking about stuff. So I knew sooner or later I'd have to have you on here. So Maddie, thank you so much for joining
Absolutely.
me today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great.